Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about the political challenges that the government continues to face. Even after a couple of days, a new scenario seems to arise for the government to deal with. Particularly in the last few days, we saw the government dealing with the extension of the COAS and a lot of issues arising from that. We'll be talking about legislative issues for this government as considering the fact that the 6-month period has already started for the government as far as formulating and formalizing the appointment and extension of the Chief of Army Staff is concerned. We'll also be talking about the economic challenges that of course are paramount as far as the country is concerned, as far as the economy is concerned, and are running side by side for the government. Let's talk about all of that. Let's also talk about the kind of interaction that will be needed as far as the government and the opposition parties are concerned, considering that the government will have to have the opposition play ball with them as far as this legislation is concerned, considering the numbers that they have both in the upper house and the lower house. Let's talk about all of that today. I have with me Dr. Niaz Murtaza, who's a senior analyst. Thank you for joining us today. Senator Anwarul Haq Kakar Saab, thank you for being with us today. Niaz Saab, let's start off with you. Like I said, we've seen the statements that have come out from the government now and again, I would say time and again. We've seen what the Prime Minister also has said, even yesterday, the tweets that the Prime Minister spoke about. He talked about a sort of conspiracy. He talked about people who have looted the country again. In this kind of a climate, when the government will need the opposition members in the parliament in the next, in the next coming months, considering this legislation in particular, which is on the horizon, and they have to do it. There's no choice as far as that is concerned, according to the Supreme Court. How will that happen?
Well, I mean, that is the thing, if I just pick up on one sentence that you mentioned, that, it's just lurching from crisis to crisis, and that's how it's been for the last, I don't know how many months. One thing is hardly over and the next thing is up on our face. But, I mean, this particular incident, as different newspapers have mentioned, comedy of error, circus of error, the most shambolic, event in the PTI era. I mean, this, as the court itself said, how much incompetence does it require to, for this kind of a thing to happen, that you're, issuing one, a piece of paper after another, and yet you're not being able to solve. And in the end, it wasn't the government that was able to solve the issue. It was the court that gave a way out to the government, and even that's debatable when on the one hand you are saying that there is no provision for extension for the COS. How can you then give us an extension? So again, a very debatable judgment, I would say. But again, now looking forward, the tweet that the Prime Minister sent out, I mean, it was weird. I mean, clearly the court itself is saying that it is the fault of the government, and their degrees should be checked. And at the end of the day, the Prime Minister and even the other ministers are trying to shift the blame on other people. Even the court itself, at least on social media, was called Indian agent and so on. And certainly the Prime Minister comes in and tries to say that this was all part of a conspiracy. So I think some kind of maturity is expected from the Prime Minister especially, but even the other senior ministers.
But as far as this appointment, this extension is concerned, of course things have always been, I mean, it's not the first time that the COS is being given an extension. And I'm sure that things have been done in this manner. Don't you agree?
Well, I mean, nobody bothered to check whether there was, a provision for extension. So, at least you could say there was this ignorance, right? It happened in ignorance. Now we know there is no provision. The highest court of the country has said that, and yet a 6-month extension is being given under what rule? I mean, there were other options available. The plan B was, there was, I think, a presidential ordinance that was ready. That might have been, I mean, ordinances are not a good thing, but at least it would have been better than this option where you've appointed somebody without a law being there. So, they could have issued a presidential ordinance or just appointed somebody else. But anyway, going forward, I think there is a need for the government to admit its mistakes, fix its house, and then reach out to the opposition. But because without the opposition's cooperation, they are not going to be able to get this, legislation passed. And some people, I think one of the minister mentioned that if the opposition doesn't cooperate, then they will be liable for contempt of court. That's ridiculous. The court has given an order to the government, not to the leader of the opposition or anybody else. So if somebody gets, held for contempt of court, it's going to be the government. So they should reach out to the opposition and, be polite with them and find a way out of this.
Right, I'm going to go to Senator Saab. Senator Saab, what's your take on it? I mean, of course, in a sense, things have been done this way, but the government overlooked a lot of things. But, even Nyasa was saying, the court has given the government a way out. But how do you see this 6-month period in which he's being allowed to, the COS is being allowed to continue and the law has to be formulated? How do you see this, this provision, this amendment, so to speak?
First of all, I think so. One needs to clarify this perception, which probably is coming out of the lack of understanding of entire military act of Pakistan. That is that there is no legal provision for the extension, as if the military act bars any appointment to be extended. This is not the case. The case is that whenever a need has arisen, the decision has been made without any rules and regulations. There are no regulations specifically who could clarify that for if you are doing an extension.
But does it allow for extension per se?
Of course it does.
But it doesn't then say what circumstances.
This is what I'm trying to explain. This is the confusion. Okay. It does not hamper you. It does not stop you to have an extension of any service chiefs. It could be air service chief. It could be naval service chief. It could be army service chief. But the issue over here is that in which court was also interested, that are there any procedures laid down? Is there anything in the rules of business which clarifies that if you are doing an appointment as an extension, for what would be the tenure of that appointment?
But there's no such provision for the Prime Minister of the country.
No.
There's no such provision for the National Assembly or the Senate as far as continuing or extending the term is concerned.
No. This is what I'm saying. So if all those extensions which were done, are they illegal if I raise a question? No, they were not. All the decisions which has been taken by those former army chiefs, if you have killed all the terrorists in this country and you have won a war on terror by under the leadership of those previous army chiefs, if you accept this argument, then the killing of Baitullah Masood was an illegal act. Can we accept that? No, we can't, because that was a legitimate entity. That was a legitimate functioning. The issue is...
But under what law?
This is what I'm trying to explain. That there was a military act which does give you a provision under the Constitutional Act of 243 to raise a professional military, naval force, air force, and president of the country would be the supreme commander of these defense forces.
Right.
And their chiefs would be appointed by the advice of the Prime Minister, and it is mandatory for the president to accept that. And whenever a need arises, he can extend or reappoint those appointments. No such thing is in the law which bars or stops Prime Minister or executive to perform that function. And that's how it has been practiced for the last 70 years in this country. What was lacking actually, that law does not specifically codify that what would be the tenure of that extent. It can be extended for 1 hour, it can be extended for 1 year, it can be extended for 10 years, it can be extended for indefinite period. This is what court was interested in, to bring it to the knowledge of the parliament, to ponder over these questions and to codify it so there is a clear cut regulations in the future whenever you make a decision in this regard.
So just out of curiosity, I mean, to clarify, if the parliament cannot then, I mean, if the parliament chooses to actually, formulate a law which is against an extension, then it will have to amend that law.
Yes.
Because you're saying that it already exists.
No, well, the law exists. Now the Parliament, according to the direction of the Supreme Court, it has to deliberate on that.
Right.
Parliament can come up with this conclusion that
There is no
from
need
now
for an extension.
onwards, there will be no extension.
But then they
Parliament has
would
got
have to
the
amend
inherent
that.
right of that. Parliament can do that. Or Parliament can say the next service chief would be, let's say the tenure would be for 2 years, or 3 years, or 5 years. Whatever it comes in the collective wisdom of the Parliament, they
Right.
can deliberate on that and they can go for the piece of the legislation.
Right, but if they have to do that, they have, I mean, if they have to formulate a law, they will need the opposition. There's no two opinions on that, isn't that true?
There are two opinions on that. The ideal situation is yes, of course. And in my personal opinion also, you have to bring in the opposition into the ambit of the system. You
Right.
cannot completely divorce opposition as if they don't exist. That is a non-democratic approach. But in this specific case, the most important question is that do you require a constitutional amendment, or do you require
A
an
simple
act of
majority,
Parliament?
right.
If you require an act of Parliament to change the Pakistan Military Act, then there is no need for 2/3 majority. And for that, primarily, I think so they would be in the position if they call in a joint session, as we are in a minority in the Senate. In the joint session, they probably would be in the position to pass an act of Parliament. But ideally, as it relates to the national security of this country, it is of a paramount attention to any citizen of this country. I personally feel opposition parties should participate in it. They should have a position on it. They should have some sort of explanation to their own constituents and generally at large to the country also, that what is their view on these issues, and they should be made inclusive in this whole process.
Right, I'm going to come back to you. I'll go to Dr. Niaz with this. Dr. Saab, in your opinion, even if there's this issue like, you know, Senator Saab saying of a simple majority versus a 2/3 majority, and if the government needs a simple majority, it will be easier for them. There's no doubt about that. But as far as, you know, we've seen the comments that have been coming, that the kind of antagonistic approach that unfortunately has been seen till date is not something that will you know, make the engagement easier with the opposition parties.
Definitely.
Particularly, you know, we've seen, of course, you know, after the former Prime Minister was allowed to leave, a lot of comments were made, and you know, they've been continued. I mean, we've seen the approach of the government, so to speak, has not been very conciliatory. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. But before I come to that, just to, you know, address the points made by my friend, you know, I think it's very clear in, you know, the judgment that has come out, the short judgment, as well as, you know, what's been reported in good newspapers, that the Supreme Court felt that, you know, there is no provision at all. It's not just about the tenure, but the fact that there is no provision for an extension at all.
Right.
And even if, you know, the confusion was about the length of the tenure, and, you know, the Supreme Court was rejecting a 3-year extension, then on what basis could it give a 6-month extension? You know,
Right.
the same logic applies that there is no tenure mentioned, so how can you give even a 6-month extension then? So clearly, you know, this judgment is a bit, you know, confusing.
Right.
But then, you know, we need to look forward, and again, I would say, you know, 6 months is not a very long time, you know, considering, you know, how slowly this government moves, and then, you know, there are ways available to even the opposition to drag things, and especially if you have to go through, you know, a joint session, that's going to take even much longer. So I think it's in the interests of everybody. It, you know, requires a certain amount of maturity, cool-headedness, which has been missing from the ranks of the PTI so far, and, you know, it's clearly reflected in the kind of tweet where, you know, there was no mention of, you know, the government's own mistakes, whereas, you know, the Supreme Court was very, very clear about where the fault lies. And the whole thing was, you know, on conspiracies and other people, and, you know, Mr. Farooq Naseem was saying, why didn't the previous two governments fix it? You know, his own party was, you know, part of the coalition under the PPP. So instead of, you know, going into this blame game and, you know, feeling very triumphant that, you know,
Right.
this is our victory. You know, they need to reach out to the opposition, and not just on these issues. There, you know, there is the issue of the ECP. The ECP is going to go
Right.
into limbo. There are so many other issues which are pending. Why? Because of the immaturity of the PTI and the ruling coalition. They just don't want to, you know, reach out to the opposition and, you know, engage in a constructive dialogue with them on issue after issue after issue. So I hope this is a wake up call for them. Otherwise, you know, they are going to find themselves into, you know, thicker soups. Not even months, you know, I think it might be another couple of weeks where something similarly
Similar can
big
happen.
comes up.
Gee,
So, you know,
let's
it's
take,
important.
Senator Saab, what's your opinion on this? Of course, you know, we have seen that the government has had, I mean, of course, there are issues with the government, even as far as the economic challenges are concerned. Of course, you know, it's not as far as the economics of the country are concerned. The government has maintained, and it's a reality that when they came into power, there were huge issues to start off with, but those issues are still pending. So in that kind of a climate, and you know, there's been talk of economic charter from various quarters, things like this, when we talk about economy, when we talk about issues of national importance, particularly like, you know, the extension of the COS also, all of these matters are of national importance. But along with this, as far as reforms are concerned, when we talk about judicial reform, or we talk about police reform, when we talk about institutional reform, institutional supremacy also, PTI did take on a lot of that before they came into power. For all of those issues to be addressed or moves to be made in that quarter, in that direction, they need a support, some sort of support from the opposition. Isn't that true?
No saner individual would disagree on this position, of course.
Right.
But having said this, that there is a requirement of opposition's constructive role in the parliament for the legislative business, and probably a few other areas also, that does not qualifies, justifies the moral strengthening position of the opposition and a demoralized position of the government. I mean,
Right.
you could pick and choose and do your own judgments. Every individual has got the right to do that. But at the same time, you could disagree with the language of PTI. You could disagree with in the manner they are expressing themselves publicly, or for that matter, Prime Minister himself. But at the same time, one has to realize that there is a huge constituency in this country which follows PTI's cadre and which has taken up on this anti-corruption drive, on this agenda. So a large section of a Pakistani society actually thrives on this, they survive on this, and they want to see their leader. I'm not from PTI, but I'm an ally. But I do see people who want to perceive their leader, their prime minister, as someone who is quite tough on these measures, who doesn't seem to be compromising on these issues. So it is a domestic and political requirement for the PTI also. So we have to understand in that context also.
Right.
It's not just a one-way traffic that you just label everything bad on PTI and its government and get away with it and rationalize the position of opposition.
Right.
Opposition has its own shortcomings, it has its own strengths also.
And it also has its own axis to grind, you know, as far as their
Well,
issues.
I didn't want to go into
there has
that,
to be,
but to
let's
be
talk
honest
about-
with you, they were more interested in getting out of their convicted leader rather than in improving criminal justice system or in police reforms or improving the healthcare system in this country or putting the economy in out of the shambles. I mean, there are people who would be very critical of even opposition's role. If you talk to them about foreign policy, they would link it to their leadership's situation. If you talk to them about Kashmir, they would link it to their leadership situation. If you bring on table anything, they would bring it to the plight faced by their leadership. So you do come to a conclusion that they are only obsessed with one situation.
I want to talk about you know, the point we discussed as far as the Army Act is concerned, and we have with us the former Chairman Senate Wasim Sajjad. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Yes, hello.
Ji, Sajjad sir, we want to know, particularly as far as the Army Act is concerned, is there a provision within the Act that regulates extension, not the time period of it, but whether the extension can be given? Ji, can you hear us? Ji, can you hear us?
Hello? Hello?
Ji, can you hear us?
Gee, I can hear you. As I said, there is no mention of extension in the Army Act, and extensions have been given by interpreting Article 243, which gives the power of appointment to the President on the advice of the Prime Minister. And it has been assumed that the power to appoint includes the power to reappoint. And also the practice which has been continuously in vogue for the last so many years, there have been two extensions given by the civilian governments, one during the time of President Iskandar Mirza, when he gave extension to the then chief of the army, which was Ayub Khan, and then General Kiani some years ago. And then there have been extensions given by the army chiefs when they took over and they gave them to themselves. Those would be questionable. So there has been a practice which has been in vogue for a long time. And I think this is, maybe you can say that this is use of executive power, which has been used by the executive authorities without any questions being raised. But now that this question has come up and the Supreme Court has given a verdict, I think it's a good development that all this will be regulated by laws and rules and regulations.
But if there wasn't a law before, and like you're saying, this is an exercise of executive power, then all those extensions which were granted before, are they, are they legit, so to speak? Are they, they hold because under what law do they hold then?
They would be treated as past and closed transactions. They've been extensions granted under the, I would say, Constitution, but now some questions have been raised. It's not that the Supreme Court has said that they are illegal. The Supreme Court has said that for future, we need some clarity about the law under which these appointments are made. So I think any law which is made which will be for the future, it would not affect or in any way damage what has been done in the past.
Does the judgment itself that has come out, yesterday, does it talk about a discussion relating to the perks and privileges of a COS also?
Yes, it says that all these matters should be regulated by law, because at the moment, neither the term of the Chief of Army Staff nor his privileges and allowances, there is nothing which is covered by law. I think it's been maybe some regulations, maybe practices, maybe executive orders, but nothing which is open to the public, nothing which is visible, nothing which has come before Parliament. So I think now, in view of the Supreme Court directions, the matter will come before Parliament, and some may be regulated through an act of Parliament, and something may be left to be regulated through rules and regulations.
But this will be the law that now the Parliament is required to pass in the next 6 months. It will have to be done by simple majority, right?
Yes, any amendment in the Army Act would be by a simple majority, but it has to be passed both by the National Assembly and the Senate.
How difficult do you think it will be for the Parliament at this time, for the government at this time, to manage that, considering the relationship between the government and the opposition at this time?
Normally, I would have said it would be difficult because the government does not have a majority in the Senate. But I think because it's a sensitive matter, it relates to defense, and the statements by various political parties so far have been conciliatory and helpful. And I think it's one of those matters in which perhaps the opposition would not oppose any such move, and they would perhaps go along. So the mood appears to be along those lines, just as they got together for passing the 25th Amendment regarding FATA.
Right. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being with us. Ji, at least that clarifies as far as the Army Act is concerned.
This is what exactly I was saying.
Right. There's no provision, but it's an exercise of...
Again, there is a confusion on this. That, look, 243 clearly says that you can raise defense forces and a president would be the appointing authority on the advice of the prime minister for its services chiefs. The additional sentence which was added over here by the learned former chairman Senate, rightly so, was that it was presumed and interpreted that whosoever appoints has got the authority to reappoint, and nobody questioned that. So it was a practice.
Right.
It wasn't that the Supreme
Senator
Court
Sahib,
has
how
not
do you see
taken
this?
this view
Right.
that extension is sort of illegal, or it does not
Right, of course,
have
and
any
it can't do
existence
that,
in law.
considering that it's been done in the past. I
Right.
mean,
And even in this case, they allowed this 6 months period so that you could codify those rules and regulations, and from then onwards, it would be supporting and having a legal basis of that constitutional position also.
right, but let's move on. As far as the relationship is concerned, one hopes that since it's a simple majority, it would be easier. But considering the economic challenges for the government at this time, how do you think the government purports to, as far as their narrative on the one hand is concerned? When the government came in, of course, there was a lot of talk about bringing the looted money back, and that narrative has held on. The government has held on to that very stringently. The Prime Minister also has held on to that. When you were talking earlier, you mentioned that it is important for the government because of their political reasons also for that narrative to hold. Do you think that itself is the reason why, as far as the PTI is concerned, the challenges in the economy are concerned, if they don't have that, they perhaps have nothing else to fall back?
Well, to be honest with you, economy is not at all just about bringing back the looted money. It has to do something with the production and distribution. And PTI, I think so, the serious circles amongst them also realizes that. That's why they have constituted a new economic team led by Hafiz Sheikh and Shabir Zaidi and Raza Bakir. These are the three key individuals. I am part of the Finance and Senate Standing Committee also. So I'm observing they're moving in the right direction. If not with the right pace, at least with the right direction. And what is the right direction? The right direction is they're attempting to document economy. 80% of Pakistan's economy is non-documented.
Right.
So there is a huge economic activity going on, but the state does not have any sort of role in that. They cannot raise taxes. So there is a huge fiscal deficit. They're working on the fiscal deficit. They are planning for revenue generation also. When I'm talking about the revenue generation, there are many vistas on which they're focusing. Be it the mineral exploitation in the province of Balochistan. There is a serious thinking going on over there. There are other areas how to develop the agricultural, as we are agri-based economy, how to produce and improve the agricultural productivity, how to maximize the water resource. There is a serious thinking going on in that sector also. These all things are related to overall economic activity. It's just, in my opinion, that in the media, they have failed to create the right kind of narrative and perception and right kind of optics where they could explain to the people of Pakistan, where they could explain to the intelligentsia, where they could explain to the civil society that this is their economic case, and bringing looted money is one small component of this big whole.
Right.
That is lacking, and that is seriously lacking. This is one of the reasons that they are losing on the account of perception rather than reality. A year back or 2 years back, we were in a very serious economic mess. But I guess we have recovered from that. They addressed the fiscal deficit account, the current deficit account, and then they raised a lot of money from friends abroad. They did some good steps on taxation, and they are doing more. So I think so. Next 2 years, we would be having and experiencing the positive impact of their economic planning.
But the voter who voted for PTI because of their accountability narrative, of course, wants to see that go through.
I do not dispute that, and this is what I'm saying, that it has to be part of the grand narrative. You cannot just talk on accountability and just accountability, because the economy is not about accountability only. Accountability is only part of that whole big economic scheme which you present to your countrymen, to your audience, to your followers, to whosoever is your targeted audience. There cannot be any governance. These days the buzzword is about accountable governments. It's not even more about democratic governments. The accountable governments, of course, are democratic governments, but in the garb of democracy, they have more deep sense of accountability, more transparency, more openness. And if there are no accountable governments, they are not even being perceived as liberal democratic entities. They tend towards fascism, they tend towards negative political tendencies. So we need to bring back that middle class orientation into the democratic practice, into the political practices of this country. And for that, PTI was just a beginning. There is a huge journey for this country. And that journey has to take shape. I'm certain about this. And yes, PMLN, PPP, JUI, and other political forces, they have to align themselves with these core values. Until and unless political parties, they do not align themselves with the accountable government concept, I fear and I forecast that their political relevance would fade away with the passage of time, and it wouldn't be long, it would be very quick.
Niaz Sahab, do you agree? Do you think that even if the government doesn't, of course, that narrative is important, and according to Senator Saab, it needs to be important to all, across the board, all political parties?
Yeah, I mean, I remember the slogan of PTI when it was in the opposition that, accountability is important, but accountability must start at the top with the Prime Minister and the ruling party. So why not apply that logic today? And, if you're really serious about accountability, start with accountability within your own party, and then we'll see, how many MNAs they're really left with. And I agree, there is a constituency within the PTI which cares about these things, but, that is not the majority of the constituency of the PTI that has won the 2018 votes. I still remember, Imran Khan about 2 months before the elections openly saying that we cannot stick to our ideology, and unless we open the floodgates for the electables, we are not going to win this election. And this is how they won the elections, by taking all these electables from different parties. And the people who vote for electables, they don't really care about opposition. They really care about delivery, however it is done to them. So I think the PTI needs to recognize its new constituency. It's not its original constituency, the urban middle class, which really cares about anti-corruption efforts and so on. And it also needs to learn lessons from the other countries in the region which are doing well, countries like Bangladesh. I don't see this kind of anti-corruption drive in Bangladesh leading to this economic growth that it is enjoying. It has the highest growth rate in Asia Pacific region. So they focus on completely different kind of things, the production, the distribution, and they realize that as they keep growing, these things will come, and the corruption will also gradually start to decrease. So it's time that the PTI, just imagine that the Prime Minister was going for this inauguration of this road in Havelia and so on, part of CPAC, and it was a golden opportunity for him to talk about CPAC and how it can transform Pakistan. But unfortunately, what was he doing? Again, he was talking about his accountability and catching thieves and catching looters. Most of his speech was about that. So I think there has to be a complete reorientation within the PTI, especially with the Prime Minister. I think the allies are giving them very sound advice that bringing looted money is only a very small part of it. Focus on production, focus on distribution, focus on agricultural growth, and it would be good if the senior ministers, the finance minister hardly comes on TV or before the press.
Right.
So it's basically then left to the Prime Minister himself, and he needs to start articulating a clear vision and focus more on what the party is going to deliver, and put all this talk about accountability and looted money on the back burner and focus on the real issues of Pakistan.
I think so. We need a balanced approach. In my opinion, partially probably is right, but partially the issue with this argument is that it is presumed that the core value of accountability is the ownership of PTI and no one else. And the rest, they accept
But doesn't it
corruption
have-
as part and parcel of the political system,
Right.
and they say you have to live with it. It is part of the system, and it does happen, and you move on. And PTI probably has taken a very, very extreme position on the other hand. You need to bridge this. Value has to be shared by every political party. Accountability has to be taken religiously
Right.
by everyone. Corruption has to have zero tolerance, be it PMLN, be it PPP, be it PTI, or anyone. We can give many examples in the region of the economic growth. Bangladesh, of course, I don't want to engage in that detailed debate that what are the reasons for their economic growth, but
But
let's focus on us.
But let's focus on us and let's focus on economy, but also other issues. For example, let me go on, and we were talking about earlier, we touched upon reform. You know, we all know the exchange between the Prime Minister and you know, the Chief Justice that happened, I think about a week or so ago.
Yeah, more
And
or
we
less.
saw the things that were said and then, you know, answered back. A lot of those issues will not arise if the government moves towards, for example, judicial reform also. Because when we talk about judiciary, we talk about our legal system, there's no doubt that there is a lot that needs reform there also. If we look at police, there's no doubt that needs reform. You know, we look at as far as our bureaucratic structure is concerned, civil structure is concerned, there is need for reform across the board. Do you think the government is making some headway there? Any move towards it? What kind of you know, movement is there?
In the initial days of the government, I was privy to certain information, and I think so there was thinking process on the civil servants reform. I think so Mr. Arbab Shehzad was tasked to go through the whole civil service structure and come up with the recommendations for the reform. And Ishrat Hussain also, he was also tasked with this kind of agenda. So yes, there is a thinking and there is an attempt also on the part of the government. As far as the remarks between Prime Minister and the Chief Justice is concerned, I'll be quite honest on that front, that if you recall a year back, Chief Justice himself encouraged or talked or hinted, there was an insinuation about a forum where you could have a dialogue of the different sections of the society concerning about the themes faced by this society and state structure. Unfortunately, that forum is non-existent. And when such constitutional forums or even informal forums are non-existent, you sometime come up with public positions and articulating something publicly. At times, we are lost in semantics, at times we are lost in the right kind of vocabulary, the intention towards the audience. Right. So it's all complicated communications apparatus. I am not accusing that either Chief Justice of Pakistan did not understand it correctly or Prime Minister did not intend that, but in the absence of such forum, misunderstandings, there are chances that the misunderstandings do emerge.
You're saying that that kind of dialogue, I mean, there needs
I
to
wish,
be a dialogue.
I wish there had been a forum in this country. It could be anywhere, Parliament, outside Parliament, with the core national themes. I would avoid the word national or phrase of national interest. There are national themes. There is a national theme of economy. There is a national theme of water resources. There is a security situation.
But
there are
also
foreign policy situations.
Right. But
Reforms.
also if there was reform or some movement towards it, then a large, you know, of course, it's not affecting only the dialogue. It's not affecting
but the
only
institutional heads. My suggestion is, and it's not my suggestion. I'm just trying to comprehend what the Chief Justice of Pakistan has said, and second that, and try to clarify what my position is also on that. That all the institutions represented by their respective heads could come up and give institutional input on these national themes. And then you can take those inputs and that could be made part of national debate, to the civil society, to the media, to the different political parties, and they can own those narratives, and that's how you get public support also in the shape of governance.
Ji, Niaz Sahab, what's your take on this?
Well, I mean, I agree with many of the points. You know, I mean,
And
theoretically.
national dialogue, so to speak,
Exactly,
you know, is
exactly.
of course a good idea. But at this time, of
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we've had enough dialogue now. It's about, you know, putting things into practice, really. You know, we've had so many task forces, commissions, and this and that. Now it's time to deliver on economic policy. You know, so far, what has happened is the only thing that the government has done so far is, you know, issue administrative orders which have immediate impact. You know, like, for example, State Bank jacking up economic interest rates. Then, you know, depreciating the rupee. But the thing is, you know, all those steps can only slow down the economy. You know, the finance ministry cutting down on development expenditure, increasing import rates and so on. All these steps, you know, you just sit in your office and, you know, the economy has to obey you. But all those steps only slow down the economy. If you want to, you know, jumpstart the economy again, you have to negotiate with businessmen. You have to come up with new ideas on what you are going to produce, how you are going to collect
right,
direct
which,
taxes,
you
and
know,
that's
Senator
not
Saab
happening.
is saying that the government is working on as far as the agriculture sector is concerned, water preservation, he mentioned a few. Let's hope that they can actually work towards that. And thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we're nearly out of time. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Niaz Murtaza. Thank you for your time. Senator Anwarul Haq Saab, thank you for joining us. As far as the economy is concerned, certainly the government needs to have the stakeholders, all of them, aboard. They need to discuss the situation. They need to work towards, if we talk about reform, then institutional reform, which was and has been a huge agenda of the government. Let's hope that they can do that. As far as the judgment of the Supreme Court is concerned, it will inspire dialogue between the opposition and the government. It seems that since it's a simple majority, and not a 2/3 majority, it will be easy for the government to do that. Let's hope that they can do it within the 6 months as required. Thank you so much for joining us on this.